The security monitor showed the clerk standing behind themselves. The store was quiet in the way only late nights know how to be quiet. Not peaceful, just emptied. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, uneven, one tube flickering every few seconds above the drink coolers. Outside, the gas pumps stood under their canopy like frozen animals, slick with mist. The road beyond them was empty. No cars, no wind. Inside, the air smelled of warm plastic, burnt coffee, and cleaning solution. Evan sat behind the counter, alone, halfway through a routine shift that blurred into every other one he'd worked this month. Graveyard hours, minimal customers, long stretches of nothing broken only by the tick of the wall clock and the low buzz of electricity crawling through the building. He leaned back in the chair and glanced at the security monitors out of habit. For feeds, front door, aisle 1, back storage hall. Behind the counter, everything looked normal. First, he looked away to sip his coffee. Tasted thin, metallic. The cup was still warm, but he didn't remember refilling it. He frowned, then shrugged it off. Memory did strange things at night. When he looked back at the monitors, the image behind the counter lagged. Just a fraction of a second. Evan shifted in his chair. On the screen, the movement followed, but late, like a poorly synced reflection. He stared harder. The delay stopped. Probably the cameras, he told himself. Old system. Cheap wiring. Management never fixed anything until it broke completely. He watched the feeds anyway. Seconds stretched. The clock above the cigarettes ticked. 12:47 a.m. The front door feed remained empty. The aisles were still. In the back hall, the emergency light glowed dull red over stacked boxes. Behind the counter, Evan sat exactly as he was now. Then something moved. A shape stepped into frame behind him. On the monitor, Evan's breath caught. The figure was close, too close, standing just behind the chair, tall enough that its head nearly brushed the edge of the camera's view. It was him. Same dark jacket. Same grease stain near the sleeve cuff. Same slumped posture he'd picked up after weeks of overnight shifts. But this version wasn't sitting. It was standing behind him, hands resting loosely at its sides, head tilted slightly downward, as if watching him watch the screen. Evan didn't move. On the monitor, the standing Evan didn't move either. The store's hum grew louder in his ears. Or maybe his heartbeat had. "Okay," he whispered, testing the sound of his own voice. Came out thin, fragile. The standing figure's mouth didn't move. Evan slowly raised his hand. On the monitor, the seated Evan did the same, perfectly mirrored. Behind him, the standing Evan stayed still. Cold crawled up Evan's spine. He didn't feel anyone breathing on his neck. No warmth, no presence, just empty air and humming lights. He turned around. Nothing. The counter behind him was bare. The narrow space between shelves empty. When he turned back to the monitor, the standing Evan was closer. Not physically closer, but nearer in a way that felt wrong. The camera angle hadn't changed, yet the figure seemed larger in frame, its features more defined. Its eyes were open wider than Evan's own. Watching, the clock ticked. 12:47 a.m. It hadn't moved. Evan swallowed. This isn't funny. He reached for the radio under the counter and clicked it on. Static burst out, then a fragment of a song warped, slowed, like it was drowning. He turned it off. The standing Evan's head tilted further. Evan stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. On the monitor, the seated Evan stood, but the standing one remained where it was. Now there were two of him behind the counter. Evan felt dizzy. The room swayed, just slightly, as if the floor were breathing. He stepped forward, out from behind the counter. On the monitor, one Evan did the same. The other didn't. The standing figure stayed behind the counter, perfectly still, eyes locked on the camera. On Evan. "Stop," Evan said. The word echoed strangely, like it bounced back before it fully left his mouth. The clock ticked again. 12:47 a.m. He looked up at it, confused. He was sure time had passed. He'd felt it dragging, thick and heavy. The standing Evan on the screen smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough. Evan backed away from the monitors. His heel bumped into a display rack. Chips rattled softly. On the aisle camera, the sound came a moment late. The delay was growing. His reflection in the freezer doors didn't match him anymore either. When he moved, it hesitated. When he stopped, it kept going for half a second longer. He squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them, the store lights dimmed. Not out, just lower, like the building was sinking into sleep. The standing Evan on the monitor raised a hand. Slowly, deliberately, and waved. Memories slid loose in Evan's head. Little things, gaps, moments he couldn't place. Hadn't someone come in earlier? Hadn't he rung someone up? When had he last checked the time? 12:47 a.m. Again. The standing Evan leaned forward, face closer to the camera now. Its lips moved. The monitor didn't have sound, but Evan knew what it was saying. You're tired. Evan shook his head violently. No, I'm here. He slapped himself hard. The sting flared. Real. On the monitor, both Evans flinched. The standing one laughed. Soundless. The store felt smaller. Aisles stretching longer than they should. The back hall feed on the monitor flickered, showing the door open for a single frame, then closed again. Evan staggered toward the front door. The bell above it didn't ring when he passed beneath. Outside, the pumps were gone. Just darkness. He turned back toward the counter. On the monitor, the standing Evan was gone. Only one Evan remained. Behind the counter, standing, watching the screen, Evan looked down at himself, at his hands. They felt heavy, distant. The monitor image moved before he did. He tried to scream, but the sound came late, dragging behind his own mouth like a bad echo. The screen behind the counter flickered. Now it showed the store empty. Lights on. Chair pushed in. No clerk visible anywhere. The clock ticked. 12:47 a.m. The front door opened. A customer stepped inside, shaking rain from their jacket, barely glancing up. Hey, they said. You open? Evan smiled from behind the counter. Yeah, he replied easily. All night. A customer left behind a wallet filled with photos of the clerk sleeping. The gas station settled into its night rhythm just after midnight. Lights buzzing, coolers humming. The highway beyond the windows reduced to an occasional hiss of tires slicing through wet asphalt. Rain clung to the canopy outside, dripping in slow, irregular taps that echoed louder than they should have. Mara stood behind the counter, alone, scrolling through nothing on her phone, watching the seconds crawl across the digital clock above the cigarette rack. 12:18 a.m. The numbers blinked once, subtly, then continued as if nothing had happened. She rubbed her eyes. Graveyard shifts always did this, made time feel thick, unreliable, like it could bend if you stared at it too long. The door chimed. She looked up. The customer stood just inside the entrance, rain-dark coat hanging straight off his shoulders. He hadn't shaken off the water, hadn't moved at all, really, just stood there, hands at his sides, eyes scanning the store, not browsing, cataloging. Hey, Mara said. Her voice sounded too loud. Let me know if you need anything. He nodded once. Slow, precise. He walked the aisles without picking anything up. Past the drinks, the chips, the cheap sunglasses. Every few steps, he glanced toward the counter, eyes lingering a beat too long. Mara had the strangest sense she'd seen him before. Not his face exactly, just the way he moved. Familiar, like a memory she couldn't quite place. He brought a single item to the counter, a bottle of water. Room temperature. He set it down carefully, aligning it with the edge. Quiet night, Mara offered. Yes, he said. His voice was soft, nearly swallowed by the hum of the lights. You sleep here sometimes. Her fingers paused over the register. What? He tilted his head, as if listening to something she couldn't hear. Behind the counter, when it's slow, a flicker of unease ran through her. No, I don't. He smiled faintly, not apologetic, not amused. Of course, he said. She rang him up. The register beeped, then lagged, the total appearing half a second after she pressed the button. The reflection in the plexiglass didn't quite match her movement. He paid in cash. Exact change. As he turned to leave, something slipped from his coat pocket and landed on the floor near the door with a soft, hollow sound. A wallet. Hey, Mara called. You dropped. The door chimed again as he stepped out into the rain. She waited, listening for footsteps, for the engine of a car starting. Nothing. The pumps outside stood empty. She picked up the wallet. It was old, leather cracked, edges worn smooth by years of handling. Warm, oddly, like it had been sitting in someone's hand for a long time. Great, she muttered. Of course. She opened it, expecting an ID. No cards, no cash, just photographs. They were tucked neatly into the slots, black and white prints, their corners rounded with age. The first photo made her breath hitch. It was her, behind the counter, asleep. Her head rested on her folded arms. The register glow lit her face from below, carving soft shadows under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back the way she wore it on shift. She stared at it, pulse thudding in her ears. That couldn't be right. She flipped to the next photo. Another angle, slightly closer, her mouth open just barely, a faint crease between her brows, like she'd been dreaming. The next one showed her from the side. Then another, different nights, different clothes, same place. In one, the lights were dimmer. In another, the clock behind her read 3:07 a.m. Mara's hands began to shake. She looked up at the counter, at the spot where she sometimes leaned when her legs ached. She'd never fallen asleep on shift. She was sure of it. The clock ticked. 12:18 a.m. Still. She turned the wallet over, inspecting it again. The leather smelled faintly of dust and something metallic. Old paper. Old rooms. She checked the security monitor mounted above the coffee machine. Front door. Aisle 1. Back room. Counter. Empty. All of it. Except her. Standing there now. She waved a hand in front of her face. On the monitor, the movement lagged, then caught up. Her reflection in the cooler glass blinked a moment after she did. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She forced herself to keep looking through the wallet. The photos continued. Some were closer, intimate, taken from just a few feet away. One showed her sleeping in the break room chair, jacket pulled over her shoulders. Another captured her at the counter again, eyes closed, one hand still wrapped around a pen. She didn't remember any of this. The last photo made her stomach drop. It showed her sleeping at home, on her couch, blanket pulled to her chin, television glow frozen on her face. The angle suggested the photographer was standing over her, watching. Her phone buzzed suddenly, making her gasp. A missed call notification. No number, just a timestamp. 3:07 a.m. She checked the clock. 12:18 a.m. It blinked. 12:19 a.m. The store lights flickered. When they steadied, the security monitor changed. The counter feed showed Mara asleep behind it. Head down. Exactly like the photos. Mara stared at the screen, heart pounding. I'm not, she began, then stopped. She didn't remember sitting down. Didn't remember leaning forward. Her arms felt heavy, warm. She looked down. The counter edge pressed against her cheek. The register glow was too bright. She jerked upright, nearly knocking the wallet to the floor. On the monitor, she didn't move. The sleeping Mara remained still, breathing. The hum of the store deepened, lowering in pitch, like the building itself exhaled. Mara backed away from the counter. The sleeping version of her stayed put. She turned toward the door. The reflection in the glass showed her already standing there, waiting. Her memories slipped again. Tiny holes, missing minutes, whole stretches of night she couldn't account for. Hadn't she just woken up? Hadn't she been asleep? The photos felt heavier in her hands now, like they were pulling her back. A shape appeared on the aisle camera. The customer, standing perfectly still between the shelves. watching the counter, watching her. The monitor flickered, then showed another image. Mara asleep, different night, different angle. Someone stepped into frame. The camera caught only the lower half of a face. Smiling, her phone buzzed again. A new notification. Gallery updated. She didn't open it. The lights dimmed. The hum deepened. Behind her, soft footsteps stopped just short of breathing distance. A familiar voice whispered, gently, from the dark. "Don't worry," it said. "You never wake up the first time."